Welcome back to Reviews for Nerds, and welcome back to part 2 of the Commodore 64 Restore series. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, please check that out. It's all about me restoring the keyboard functions of the Commodore 64. In this video, I'm going to go through the detailed steps that I took to diagnose and repair issues I found on the board of the Commodore 64. Now, as you're watching this video, keep in mind that the only tools I had at the time were a voltmeter, a Commodore 64 with spare chips, a soldering iron, and the repair manual found online. Now, aside from those tools, I did use YouTube as a tool to check out channels like Adrian's Digital Basement, the 8-Bit Guy, and Yan Beta, among other channels, which I will link in the description below so that you can follow along with them. They're much more knowledgeable about all this stuff, and their videos are like 6 years old in some cases. I just recently got into Commodore repairs because of my father-in-law. He had a couple that he wanted to get working, and so I said I'd help him out. On top of that, a new friend of mine, Louie, gave me all of his Commodore 64 collection. So after I get done with this project, I will have unboxings of other products along with demos of games and all sorts of other cool stuff. So if you have any questions or comments about anything you see in these videos, please let me know in the comment section down below. And with all of that out of the way, let's get on to the Commodore 64 board work. Now, I'm not going to bore you here going over the processes by which I took this Commodore apart. This was shown in a little bit more detail in the previous video, and I will go over this more in the case cleaning video that I plan on putting out. However, I took out the screws in the Commodore 64 after removing the LED connector and the keyboard connector. I pulled the board out and I wiped everything down. So having previously tested the voltages coming out of the stock power supply and knowing the Commodore 64's history with failing power supplies, I had already purchased 2 replacement power supplies. I'll link them in the video description so that you can check them out yourself, but they're just pretty standard modern day power supplies. So my next step was to plug the C64 into power and then a monitor. Now, I had purchased a flat screen monitor with S-Video out as well as composite out, but there's some trickiness to that with the Commodore 64, so I ended up having to use the RF out. Now, a lot of folks don't like the RF out because they don't feel like it's a clean enough signal, but for testing purposes, it works just fine. So the next series of videos you'll see are me testing out different components and going through the C64 instruction and troubleshooting manual, which goes into great detail on how to troubleshoot individual issues with the Commodore 64. Since I filmed this video, I have purchased a dead test cartridge, which also does a diagnostic test after you get everything up and running. But initially, I don't have any of that, and all I have are 2 boards to work with, and you'll see a bunch of chip pulling, so keep that in mind. So taking an initial look at the board, everything looks pretty good on the surface. This board revision is the Commodore 250407 Rev B. VIC chip looks good, and we have a good working fuse. Now, the next part of this video, you'll see I'm just trying to figure out why I can't get a display to show anything. I've connected the RF cable to a TV. In the end, it turns out I was just dealing with a black screen issue, which is very common when chips fail on the Commodore 64. That is, I've got this original connector plugged into my TV here. So I'm going to Flip the power on. That's something we'll have to figure out. So starting off with the board, I got my voltmeter ready, and I had a quick sheet for voltages to test across the board to figure out why there was no video out. I'm going to connect myself to ground, which in this case is on the voltage regulator here. I'm going to touch different parts of the board with the power on to test both AC and DC voltages. So in this next section of video, I go into the steps I perform after meeting Louie and picking up all of his Commodore 64 and 128 stash that he had. I will be referencing a different Commodore 64, and when I received this Commodore 64, it had actually been smashed. The case had come apart, and the LED had actually been pushed through the keyboard assembly. And I will have a video on me trying to repair the keyboard assembly at some point in the future. All right. So I've been doing a lot of testing, and thankfully I found someone online locally who had a pile of Commodore 64s, and this old board was booting up to the normal screen. So I've been swapping out SID chips and VIC-2 chips and CPUs, and I'm down to testing the CIA chips. And this is board number 2. Board number 1 that I've been working on, I haven't been able to get to work even with the known good working chips. So I pulled the CIAs out of here, and now I'm going to power this on. And we've got a different pattern. So I'm going to test each one of these by putting them back. See if we get anything other than the squiggly lines. And then I can at least go and see what squiggly lines mean. We are actually making progress. It really, really does help to have a good known working board that you can swap chips around. The only problem is the good known working board, the CIAs are soldered onto the board. Now this is interesting. With known good chips, except for the CIAs, I am now getting this. I also got this weird little reset cartridge that came with a big pile of stuff the man was nice enough to give me. And you can see that it's doing something. So like I said, progress. Okay, so after doing a bunch of troubleshooting between the first board that you saw me clean and the second board, I have swapped out, and a test unit that I've received, I've swapped out and checked the VIC-2, the SID, if I get this wrong, I'm sorry, the PLA, both of the CIAs, and then these basic ROM chips here. Now, while this one's soldered on, I can flip-flop the other two. I've basically found what I believe to be a full set of working chips. So now I'm going to test. Boom, and there we go. I have fixed this Commodore 64 by finding good working chips for it. Now I'm going to resolder the bottom plate back on, test with some of the drives that my father-in-law gave me, and some of the games, and see what happens. So after mixing and matching 2 CIAs, a SID chip, and 2 basic ROMs, I was able to get a working unit out of the 2 boards that my father-in-law asked me to fix. That leaves the one board I got from Louie and the other non-working board as another repair job. Now, since this video, I have gotten the original board that Louie gave me that had the broken keyboard working with the keyboard from the Commodore with the broken motherboard that my father-in-law gave me. And now that is my test bed. I will be installing some ZIF connectors in some of the sockets on that particular motherboard, and that will become a test unit for me. My father-in-law will be receiving a fully working Commodore 64 with a 1541 floppy drive and a tape drive. It's all in the box, all with the original documentation and a new power supply. In future videos, I will have a better setup for my workstation. You will be able to see a lot better what I'm doing, and I hopefully will have a setup to where you can see what an oscilloscope shows and what the voltage meter shows. But that's down the road. I still have 3 or 4 Commodore 64s and a Commodore 128 to work on. I hope you've liked watching this video. It's as much as I have making it. My name is Bryant. This is Reviews for Nerds. Have a great day.